Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to part 4 on our series on employment and the employment process. Now, the next sections that we're dealing with have already assumed that 1, you figured out what you can actually do for work. 2, you've already applied for the position. 3, you have interviewed for the position and they've made you a job offer, right? And 4, you've expected or you have accepted the job offer, right? Now, usually you'll go into work and they'll have some things they need to cover for first day and so on and so forth. And I'm not going to go through all that process with y'all because you'll have someone from Human Resources who will be working with you to help with the finalized paperwork. And every business is a little bit different. And there'll be some standard things you fill out, so on and so forth. So what I wanted to focus on with this video is what you can reasonably expect to get paid. All right. Pretty simple. All right. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to talk primarily, I'm going to talk to you primarily about part-time work, okay, and assuming this is your first job, okay? So here's what we have to do. What to reasonably expect as compensation. All right, so minimum wage, all right? We all know what minimum wage is, right? It is saying that in certain states, and every state is different, all right, employers have to pay a certain amount at minimum for regular employees. Now, this is different than contracted employees. All right, there's a difference. Contracted means that you are on a contract and you are working for cash or straight wages, okay? You are not an official regular employee, okay? Example, a plumber would be a contractor, right? Or somebody who is coming in to help somebody at a set rate for maybe a day or 2 or 3 or a week or a set period of time, and they're not going to be considered full employees. So minimum wage works for full employees. In other words, you are employed by the company and you are considered an employee, okay? So in January 1995, minimum wage was $4.15 per hour. And as you can see, it's kind of increased since then, right? Now think about this, $4.15 an hour, right? And the average loaf of bread was, well, depending on which bread you got, was about 59, 69, 79 cents, okay? And then in 2000, it was $1 more at $5.15. In 2005, it went to $6.15. In 2010, so that was about 10 years ago from the time that this video was filmed, it went to $7.25. By the way, that says $5.03 for tipped for 2016. Tipped employees mean that the employer would pay you $5.03 per hour, right? And then everything else came from tips. In other words, if you were a waitress or if you worked in valet, as far as customer service, parking people's vehicles, so on and so forth, where tips are the accepted gratuity, or you worked in a hotel and people accepted tips, right? So those are the minimums. So they paid you $5.03 and then you worked off of additional tips, right? In 2018, it went to $8.25 per regular hour, okay? That means every hour on the clock, right, that you're working for somebody, and then $5.22 for tipped. And then in 2020, it was $8.56 per regular hour and $5.54 for tipped. All right. Now, recent regulations and recent legislation, and people have recently voted to increase the state of Florida to $10 an hour in 2021, right? And then every year go up an hour from there. Okay. So there you go. All right. That's what the expected is. Now, compare, okay, the average price for a loaf of bread, and you can kind of see how inflation works, right? We've talked about inflation a lot of times in this class, right? But compare $8.56 an hour with your average loaf of bread. Loaf of bread isn't 59, 69, and 79 cents now, is it? No. You're looking at $1.19, $1.59, okay, $2, $3 for a loaf of bread, okay? So you can kind of use that bread as the regulator for calculating inflation. All right, so what does that mean for you in the real world, all right? Well, let's say this. Let's say the employer has offered you, let's just use an even number, $10 an hour. Okay, and they say that you're going to work on average between 15 to 20 hours a week. Okay, 15 to 20 hours a week, and they say about 3 to 4 days a week. So 3 days, 15 hours, that's about 5 hours a day, add in a lunch break. So you'll be working, 5 hours still, but you'll be going in at, let's say, like at 12 and leaving at 5:30, that sort of thing. All right, so you'll be making $10 an hour. Okay, well, if you're making that and working 15 hours, you're making $150 for that week. Okay, that's easy, all right? All you had to do was take your hours worked, times it by the rate that you're making, and that equals your gross or total pay. Now, do you take the whole thing with you? No. In Mr. C's class, we've learned that there are deductions, and we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail here, right? So again, let's look at another example, right? Let's say it's 2020. You start working for somebody, and that minimum wage at $10 an hour hasn't occurred, right? So 10 hours, let's say you work 10 hours that week, right? And you clocked in, and you worked for like maybe 4 hours, and you clocked in the next day, and you worked for maybe 4 hours, and the next day you clocked in, you were expecting to work 4 hours, and the boss says, "Now we're not that busy, we don't need you," and you leave home after 2 hours, so you work 10 hours for that week, right? Well, 860 times 10 equals $86. And you can see that right there, all right? And again, this gets complicated when you consider the various deductions. All right, so what deductions am I talking about specifically? All right, well, let's take a look at those. All righty, space, there we go. All right, well, first things first, okay? How can I make this super simple? All right, so everybody has to pay federal tax, okay? Everybody has to pay federal taxes, and they call it an income tax when you start having an income, right? And what happens is that the employer pays a portion of your taxes so you don't have to, right? Now, if you're contract labor, you have to pay your own, and that gets super crazy, but that's not what we're going to talk about in this lesson, all right? So let's assume this, all right? Let's say you're working at $10 an hour, okay? And let's say $10 an hour, you're working and you work about 15 hours a week, and that stays consistent for all 52 weeks out of the year. So let me pull up the calculator here, okay? I got the calculator up. If it'll pull up for me, there it launched. All right. Now, I said $10 an hour times 15 hours a week. That means you're going to make 150 for that week, all right? Now, how many weeks are there in a year? If you're saying, Mr. C, there are 52 weeks in the year, you're right? So I want to multiply that times 52, okay? That means if I worked, okay, 15 hours a week at $10 an hour, I would expect $7,800 total pay by the time the year was said and done. So the time from January to December, okay? The first day in January to the last day of December, all right? $7,080. I'm going to close this out, and we're going to look at something. All right, so here's the deal. Here we have various rates, okay? So this is based off of how you file your taxes, okay? This is not going to be about filing taxes, but this is based off of how you file taxes, all right? Most students working part-time job will file in the single area. Okay, this means, are you single, are you married, or are you head of house? Okay, single means just that. You're not married to anybody, and you don't oversee a household. Okay, so that means single. Okay, most high school students working a part-time job are going to be single. Now, if you made the choice to become married and you are the person who is making a majority of the money, you will file married. All right, and then of course, head of house means you are the person who is overseeing the household, okay? Now, look at this. It says for the federal taxes as of 2017, okay, it says 10% if your income is up to $9,325 if you're single, $18,650 if you're married, and if you're head of household, $13,350, okay? Now, think about this one. I just said that $10 an hour times 15 hours a week for the entire year was $7,080, all right? Is that less or more than $9,325? $7,080. Yep, it's less. So that means that 10% of your income, right, will go out for federal taxes per paycheck, all right? So, think about what that means. $15. What's 10% of $15? I'm sorry, $150? Try that again. What is 10% of $150? $15. So $15 will leave out of your paycheck for federal taxes. All right. Now, This gets complicated when you start making more than that, all right? So say like you were a teacher and you had just started a new teaching position, right? The average teacher in Columbia County is in this area. So they're going to take 10% for the first $9,325. Then they're going to take 15% for every dollar from $9,325 up to $37,950. If they are married, they will take 10% out of the first $18,650, then take 15% out for every dollar over $18,650 until you reach the total income. All right. Does it sound confusing? I hope not. All right. Let's go to the next one. Here's what the tax rates were for 2020. Okay. By the way, I didn't tell you this. Okay. And this is a good time to tell you it now, right? The brackets. Okay. 10% bracket. This means that people who earn this, married earn that, or head of household and earn that are in the 10% bracket. If they earn that or less, okay? If someone is in this income area, like most teachers are when they first start working, right? They are in the 12% bracket, okay? So the 12% bracket. That means that they pay 10% on the first amount here, the $9,870 for 2020, and then they pay 12% for every dollar over $9,870 up to the point where they make here. And that's if they're single. If they're married, it changes. They pay only 10% for the $19,750, and then for every dollar over that up to, okay, $8,250, they pay that 12%. And as you can see, if you were in the 22% bracket, okay, you would pay 22% for every dollar over this amount, the $41,250 or the $8,250, okay, up to $171,050. I hope that makes sense. These are called brackets, okay? These are called the tax brackets. When somebody says, hey, which bracket are you in? That's what they're meaning, okay? Now, as you can see, it gets really, really expensive. If someone makes over, say, 6 figures, they're going to have to start paying 24% or 32% or 35% or even as high as 37% of their income back to the government to pay for various benefits that are out there. Okay, so that's what that means. Okay, so how does that affect your paycheck? Well, what they do is they take this bracket and say, okay, what would that be stretched out over the full year? And if it's less than this amount, it comes to this. If it's less than this amount, this less this. Okay, all righty, let's see here. So let's do some more math. All right, let's say you are making $8.10 an hour. Now, obviously, minimum wage has changed, so $8.10 is no longer the standard, but we'll just go with this. Okay. And let's apply this here in the mathematical sense. All right, so let's say you work 10 hours a week times $8.10 per hour. Every week you would make $81, okay? Now, $81 times 52 equals $42.12 estimated gross for that year. All right, and that falls back into the 10% bracket, all right? Because again, that amount of $42.12 is less than $9,870, okay? So you would get charged that 10% bracket. So 10% off of $81 means that it would be $8.10. So $81 minus $8.10 equals $72.90, okay? A couple of steps, but it can easily be done. So you know all those things you do in math class when you're trying to figure things out? This is how it's applicable, okay? And you don't want to just say, oh, I trust the employer, because you want to make sure that things are being done the correct way, all right? Now, additional deductions come out of your paycheck as well, all right? So you might have additional Medicaid and Medicare, and that usually equals out to about 1.5% of your income, right? And then you have Social Security that comes out, and that equals to 6.2% of your income, right? So after all is said and done, you might earn $81 for that 10 hours worth of work, but when all is said and done, you might only be taking $65 or $67 home with you, okay? So that's how it usually works out. All right, so here's what I got. I got 2 slides for you for the day's activity. Really simple, all right? You're going to figure out this first slide, which is based off of the idea that this person is hired at $8 an hour. All you have to do is figure out what that gross pay would be for each week and then figure out which bracket they would fall into. So all you got to do is do some multiplication, okay? Same thing for the next question. $10 an hour instead, and then 40 hours a week. All you have to do is just some standard multiplication. All right, so that brings me to the end of this lesson, and hopefully you found this section on employment and the employment process very beneficial. And the only lesson I have on top of this one as far as employment and the employment process are some guidelines to live and work by, and maybe you'll find something inspirational on that. And that'll be, of course, in my next video. All right, we'll see you on the next go-around.